I feel like I converted to Judaism with her because I saw it with completely fresh new eyes. First of all, everything I thought I remembered about Judaism from learning as a kid, I didn't remember. And um, I was just like amazed to learn about this religion that seems so beautiful, and being around people who are converting to Judaism and were excited about it. It was a very different thing than could have ever imagined, and it was infectious, and I became excited about it too, and I started to see it as really beautiful and special that I was part of this.
Welcome, everyone, to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Hannah Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an extraordinary couple who have an extraordinary journey. Their names are Kylie and Daniel Lobel. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So let's start with your story. Which of you wants to start? I think both of them intertwine so beautifully, and I'm not sure which one we should start with. But I think your journey was quite incredible. Kylie, maybe you should start us off.
Wow, where do I begin? So I was born. I wasn't Jewish. I lived in Baltimore, and I grew up in a secular Christian household. My grandmother was Catholic and tried to make me Catholic. She always told me that she tried to baptize my sisters and I in the sink, and that it worked for my
Oh,
sisters and it didn't work for me. So I don't know what
wow.
that meant. If as a baby I splashed the water away and said, "No, I'm a Jew, go away," or what. But,
Wow.
I ended up just becoming an atheist when I was a teenager. I was an angsty teenager, didn't see God in the world. My parents had become
So your parents were religious, but you decided to become an atheist?
so the secular Christian, no, they just celebrated,
Secular. Okay.
Xmas and Easter and things like that, but no religious things behind it. It was just my grandmother who tried. And then
And what made you become an atheist? What turned you off from God?
sure. So I did believe in God when I was little by default. I didn't really know what that meant. But I would pray to God that my parents wouldn't get divorced, and then they did. So I said, okay, well, did it
Oh,
work this time? And then my grandmother, who was my best friend, got very sick suddenly and died very young. And I had prayed for her to stay alive and get better. And, she didn't. So that also fractured my relationship with God. So by that
wow.
time, I was,
That must have been very devastating as a child going through those experiences
yeah.
that you were hoping for. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So then when I was 12, I was just talking to a friend and she said, "Well, I don't believe God exists." And that hadn't even crossed into my mind to think that.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, the Bible seems crazy. There's all these miracles that happened back then. They don't happen today. Everything I learned about, babies being born into sin and going, to the bad place if you don't get baptized. And that didn't make sense to me. It just all seemed very dark and not like a loving God was up there. So I just said, okay, I'm out. And so
Mhm.
I was that way, until I was 21 and I ended up meeting Danny and we can get into his story and, how I transformed.
Sure. Daniel, let's hear it from you.
I was born into a secular Muslim family, and uh,
We could for our listeners, Daniel is a comedian. He's a stand-up comic, so he's doing some of his comedy right now.
could be. No, I
Now,
went.
you were born in a religious family.
Yes, and I went to a Jewish school, yeshiva. I got kicked out in ninth grade for low grades. And they weren't even
Mhm.
failing grades. They just weren't great grades. They felt I was bringing down the grade point average. And it was a
Oh,
new
so sad.
school. And they were trying to establish themselves as some great academic. I remember them saying, "We're trying to be the gateway to Harvard
Mhm.
for yeshiva students," or whatever. Anyway, they
Mhm.
kicked me out in the middle of the year in
Oh, wow.
ninth grade, me and 3 other boys.
Mhm.
And, I don't know their stories, but I know that I wound up being shopped around to different yeshivas by my parents. I remember sitting into these meetings and having, to try and convince these principals that I was a good kid and that
Mhm.
I was worthy of being in the school, and they were so skeptical, and they'd be like, "It doesn't make sense. Why would you be kicked out in the middle of the year?" what did you really do? You know, and I'd be like, no, I didn't do anything. And uh, and,
Right.
and anyway, so none of them took me. I wound
Mm.
up going to one school that doesn't exist anymore now, which was more for troubled Jewish kids, and it was an hour away. We lived in Nassau County. This was in Suffolk County. I had to take an hour-long short bus ride. Then
Hmm.
when I got there,
That's a long run.
I was very into my Judaism, and I remember I was never so into the academic, secular study stuff, but I was very into the Mudei Kodesh stuff and
What does that mean?
the Jewish stuff. The
Jewish studies. Mm.
So when I got to this new school, I remember I was, like, davening, and we have a prayer called Shemona Esrei, where, like, you put your feet together and you're, like, praying silently, you don't move, and I was getting hit with spitballs, and the other kids were, like, laughing at me, and then they started
Mm.
making fun of me, like, for taking the prayers seriously, and I
Mm.
realized, like, "Oh, I better conform or I'm gonna be like the weird
The
the
outcast.
outcast." So I was just like, "Well," um, they
So you really didn't belong
I'm
there.
like, "They kicked me out of the Jewish school anyway. You know, maybe I don't," this was still a Jewish school, but, they kicked me out of, like, the real Jewish school, quote, unquote.
Mm. Mm.
So, like, that was the first, like, major fracture in my observance that I
Mhm.
recall, and I hated it there, and I begged my parents to put me in public school, and they finally did. They moved me to public school for the rest of high school, and then when I was in public school, um I used to wear a baseball cap because I like to keep my head covered. It's always important to me, and it still is. And
Mhm.
they said, "You're not allowed to wear a baseball cap. It's against the high school rules." So my rabbi, may he rest in peace, Rabbi Asher Abitan, Zichron Lebracha, of blessed memory. He was my rabbi growing up at the Sephardic congregation of Long Beach, where we went. And he went to bat for me with the public school because they said, "Oh, if he wants to have his head covered, he should wear a yarmulke." I'm like, "I'm not wearing a yarmulke in a public school." It's like
Mm.
worse than the other school, you're gonna get picked on. So
Right.
he made a case for me, and they allowed me to be the only kid who wore a baseball cap. So
Oh,
that
wow.
meant a lot to me. And then I was like, maybe like my rabbi who comes from Morocco is an exception, Sephardic Jews, but I just really, didn't have much Sephardic infrastructure outside of my synagogue where I grew up. And then my rabbi passed away.
Mm.
And then I got really angry at God for taking my rabbi away. I'm like, he was my one real connection. You took him away that I felt a strong connection through him to my Judaism. Anyway, all these things added up. It wasn't like one thing.
Right.
Then I went to Israel for the year, and I realized I don't think I really want to do the religious thing anymore. Like my
Mhm.
parents kind of pushed it on me. My experiences have been pretty bad with religious organizations, and the representation of religious Judaism that I had encountered was pretty hostile in some and um that I felt it hurt me. And I thought, you
Mhm.
know what? I looked around in Israel and I saw, oh, you don't need to be religious to be Jewish. I'm like, you could just be
Mhm.
Jewish. And I thought
Mhm.
this maybe suits me better. But still, I was holding on to things like Shabbat. I came back to New York. I started doing college. I moved to the Upper East Side. I was going to school at Baruch. I was doing Shabbat. I was doing stand up comedy. And I wasn't performing on Friday nights. And everybody else was excelling in their careers because they were out there on Friday nights, a big night, and I'm sitting at home in my apartment. My roommate decided he wasn't into being religious anymore. He and I had met in Israel, and he was going to a different college, and we got an apartment together. So he's going out Friday night. I'm sitting home alone with like two challahs, and I'm like, why am I doing this? I started going to a local Sephardic shul on the Upper East Side. I went for a few months. Nobody invited me over for a meal. I tried to I felt like I couldn't break into everybody was older than me. Nobody
Mhm.
seemed to be very interested in who I was or why I was there. And
I find it fascinating that you're at a low point in your life. You're so, disappointed with organized Judaism, if you want to call it a religious Judaism, and yet you're still keeping Shabbat. Like, what made you still keep Shabbat?
Honestly, I think it was just a matter of it's hard to let go of things that you were raised with. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I had the I mean, maybe it was more than that, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't really go back to where I was mentally at that time, but I think it was just like, well, almost scary not to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, well, I better just keep Shabbat. You don't want to break Shabbat, you know?" And so I
Right.
was doing Shabbat and I felt very lonely and isolated. Again, I had this little pull-out table in my apartment on the Upper East Side, with the leaves that lift up. And I'd lift it up and I'd make a little Shabbat and I'd sit there by myself and all my friends are out there doing comedy, which is what I wanted to do. And my roommate was out. He was very into the art scene, doing the art stuff, and I was just like, what am I doing? You know? Uh, and I remember having a decision where I'm like, "Well, look, I'm not really going anywhere in Judaism, and I'm not really going anywhere in comedy right now. I need to pick a lane and go hard at it and try and make something of myself." And obviously nobody cares about me in the Jewish world. Like, I'd never heard from anybody when I got kicked out of the Jewish school. Only one kid out of all these kids that I grew up with, like they shunned like I was like blacklisted for getting kicked out. Nobody talked to me. Nobody seemed to
Mm-hmm.
care. And then I was like, well, I think I'm just doing this stuff. Like you asked the question why I was doing it. I think I'm just doing this because I was raised this way. And maybe that's how my parents want to be, but it's not really how I feel. And it's not speaking to me. I'm not inspired. I don't know what I even believe. What am I doing? So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm done. I'm done with being religious Jew. I'm out. So I went fully fully into comedy and stopped keeping Shabbat, stopped keeping kosher, only kept Yom Kippur. That was like the only. I'm like, all Jews do Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a big deal. I never stopped believing in God. I just
Mm-hmm.
felt like you could have a relationship with God without being part of this organized religion thing. And my relationship with God is between me and God, and I'll keep Yom Kippur, and I'll go, and that will be my religious observance in a synagogue, and otherwise I'll talk to God in my prayers. So that's how I was. And I know this is kind of a long answer, but you asked a very loaded question. Anyway, long story short, uh, I went to my synagogue growing up as a Sephardic congregation in Long Beach one year for Yom Kippur, as I always did. And as the sun was setting at the end of Yom Kippur, I walked up to the boardwalk in Long Beach and was watching the sunset. And I felt like I had lived a pretty um, not great year that year, and I didn't know what kind of judgment I was in for, and I was
Mm-hmm.
scared, and I was like, I've done some things I'm not proud of, and I haven't behaved properly, and I turned to God and I said, please give me a good year, and in exchange, I'll do one Shabbat this year. I'll
Wow.
do a Shabbat.
This was on Yom Kippur that you had this conversation?
Yeah,
And after how many
Wow.
years was it of not being observant?
I'm not exactly sure, but quite a number of
It was like
years.
10 years, I think. He told me.
Oh, wow.
Well, I don't
Wow.
know. It's hard to know exact
A
10
long
years.
time. A long
10
time.
years from some point in it, but I
Yeah.
don't know exactly what point.
So you told God you'll offer him one Shabbat. Wow.
So I said, I'll do one Shabbat this year. That was my deal with God. I said, if you give me health and give me a good year, I will, and give me life, I will do a Shabbat this year. So that was that. I went back to the city. I went back to my life. I went back to doing comedy. And I was living now at this point in Williamsburg, well, Bushwick, Brooklyn, but I was often in Williamsburg, which is right next door, doing shows. And I'm walking down Bedford Avenue and I see this rabbi and he says, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, it's Friday. We do a Shabbat Friday night dinner right upstairs at my apartment there. Would you come up and we have services and everything?" I said, I'm not going to do it. I have shows tonight, Rabbi." I said, "But I'll tell you something. I did promise God that I'm going to keep a Shabbat this year. So maybe I'll come another time." He said, "Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna hold you to it. All right." So I said, "Okay, sure." And and then I often would wind up like on a Friday night. They had a little comedy room on Bedford Avenue. So I would wind up seeing this rabbi, and he'd be like, you're gonna do it?" I said, "Not this week, not this week." I already when I'd see him, I'd be like, "No, I have shows." So anyway, I kind of forgot about my promise, and the year rolled by, and months went by, and I hadn't seen the rabbi for quite a while, and we're getting closer to the next Yom Kippur, and I see the rabbi one Friday, and I'm back on Bedford Avenue. He's like, "Daniel," he already remembers my name. He's like, come up to, I have the Friday night tonight. We have a really nice dinner. It's a warm thing." I said, "Rabbi, I have a show." He says, "When is it finished?" I said, "Well, it finishes at this time, but then I have another show later in the West Village at that time." He goes, "Okay, so in between you could come up." I
Hmm.
said, "Well, I'd have to leave early," and
Hmm.
I said, "All right, all right." I did make a promise. So when I said I'm going to keep Shabbat, I didn't mean keep Shabbat in the way that you and I think of keeping Shabbat. I meant do something for Shabbat.
Hmm.
Like that was my idea of keeping Shabbat. Like have some challah, have some wine. That was my idea of Shabbat, of keeping Shabbat at that point in my life. Like showing up for a Friday night dinner in my mind would have been keeping a Shabbat. I
Shabbat.
was
So you went to that Friday night dinner?
Yeah, at this point I was already pretty anti-religion. I'd kind of grown very anti-religion. So I was like, okay, I got to do this. I made a promise. I'm just gonna go up. I'll check in, check the box that I kept the Shabbat, and then I'm gonna go do my next show and be done with it. So I go up to this rabbi's apartment, and the rabbi's name is Rabbi Shmuley Lane from Chabad of North Brooklyn.
Hmm.
And I had never been to a Chabad house before. I knew a Chabad family that I was very close with in Scotland, but it's very different. Chabad there is anyway, it's wonderful there, but that's in Scotland. So
Right.
um I'd never been to what we know as like a Chabad house, certainly in America.
Hmm.
And I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was gonna be all like black hat rabbis with
Hmm.
beards, and it was gonna be very uncomfortable for me. And I really had no understanding of how Chabad was any different than the yeshiva I went to or whatever. I didn't really understand differences or nuances in religious Judaism. But when I got up there, it was all like artists and young people, and I was like, "What's this?" And they're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, not everybody goes to Chabad is religious. You could just come and be accepted." And I was like blown away by that concept. Like, you don't have to pretend you're religious to come here. Like, that's amazing. And everybody was so nice, and it was I felt a really like nice warmth inside me when I was back in the prayers, and the prayers were so warm, and the meal was so good. I hadn't had a home cooked meal in a long time because I hadn't been going home very much, and my parent family is in Long Island. I'm in the city, and the whole thing felt great. And then, like I said to the rabbi, I have to go. I went to my next show, and he said, "Come back," and I said, "I think I will."
Hmm.
And from time to time, I started going back.
Hmm.
That's the beginnings of it, anyway.
Incredible. Wow. Okay. So you're going to Shabbat occasionally at Chabad.
Mhm.
And Kylie, where are you at this point?
So I think
How did you meet?
yeah, I think at that point I was in college and I was struggling a lot with my mental health from the outside. I was doing really great. I was getting these internships at flashy places like CBS, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, getting good grades.
This is internships for media relations
Yeah.
or
Yeah, so
for
I majored in
right?
journalism. I wanted to be some, like, big TV producer on The Daily Show or something like that. Um, and I on the outside, it looked like I had it all together. On the inside, I was a mess. I was anxious, depressed. I was a senior in college. I was like, "What am I gonna do with the rest of my life?" Like, every day was an existential crisis.
Hmm.
So, when I met
What
Daniel.
what did you feel was missing in your life?
Yeah,
I mean, here you're doing well in in your studies and you're on a good path. What was missing? Why was this existential crisis?
I mean, I just felt like life had no control. It was all random and meaningless. I remember laying in bed at night thinking, "Oh, when I die, I'm just gonna go into eternal darkness." And I'd start thinking about
Mhm.
it, and it was so sad. And I would also think just that life was so out of control. Like, what is the meaning of all this? Like, whenever I worked in journalism, so I'd see all this bad news. I'm like, what is the point of this? And how did I ever think there was a God when the world is so bad? You know?
Mm.
So I just felt like what am I here for? That was like an everyday question for me. Like I'm trying to
Right.
achieve these things, but what's the point? I'm just spinning in a hamster wheel. So, I was really feeling that my senior year of college, and because I was about to graduate, and I'd gone to a comedy show for my friend who was a comedian in New York. It turned out that he was, Danny's roommate at the time, and so we
Mhm.
met. Then we started working together. Danny had a very popular radio show, and after I graduated, I moved to the city, and I was interning at something else I really wanted to do, The Onion. I don't know if you're familiar, but, yeah, I was just living in New York with him, and
It's
at
The
this
Onion, I don't know if it's still around. It was a
yeah, it's still
satirical
around.
news.
Satirical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going off the deep
I do know that, yes.
But, so I was working there and still, like, everything I got, like, The Onion was, like, my dream, and I got that, and I was still anxious and sad, and living in the city was very hard. Um, just I had no one there except for Danny, and, I was young and lost and confused and broke.
You didn't even mention that we'd started dating, I don't think.
Yeah, we started dating. We were friends, and then we started dating a
Well,
few
first
months later.
she interned at the radio show,
Yeah.
and
Did did it bother you at that point that she wasn't Jewish?
no, it was a prerequisite for me at that point because
For me,
Okay.
it was a prerequisite that he was. All my boyfriends were Jewish. All my friends were pretty
Really?
much Jewish
I
growing up.
yeah,
That's who I felt comfortable with.
so I grew as I was, became, and I think this is, a matter of how things work spiritually. When you remove yourself from spirituality, um, it's easy to become angry. The
Mm.
longer you're away from it, you can become more and more angry at it. I became so angry at, um, at religious Judaism. And
So
like
you kinda
it
became, like, antagonistic. Why do you think you become angrier and angrier at it?
Um,
Like,
because
why
I
the
think there's
anger?
a spiritual answer to that, because if you have a soul that has at one point been ignited and then you
Mhm.
suffocate it, um, whether intentionally or unintentionally, then there's something you feel in anger and you don't know where to put it, so you put it towards that. I think that's the answer.
Right, that
Because
makes a lot of sense.
like, even when I was not fully out of Judaism and I was still keeping Shabbat in my apartment and on the Upper East Side, I wasn't angry at Judaism, but once I'd
Mm,
completely disconnected from it and I felt like I was no longer part of it, then I started looking back at it and having resentment towards it and being like, "Wow,
mm,
I can't believe I was involved with that," and religion is so stupid, and religious people are so mean, um and and it just built and it snowballed, and the more I wasn't involved, the more angry I was at it. And the only one who was able to penetrate that was that rabbi in North Brooklyn, Rabbi Shmuley Lane, who was so warm and brought me up to this what I thought was a pretty cool scene. So that was like the only place that I had room for religion in my heart.
hmm. Wow,
So
interesting,
yeah, to
fascinating.
answer your question, I didn't want to date Jewish girls because I didn't want to get pulled back into Judaism. I didn't want anybody who thought that it wasn't stupid or anything like that. So
Mm. And Kylie, what was bringing you to date Jewish men?
I really
What
don't
was
know.
pulling you?
I just always felt more comfortable with them, and it wasn't obviously they weren't religious, so, they would be eating bacon and things like that. I didn't really know anything about Judaism, but yeah, that's just as soon as I got to high school, I grew up in Baltimore where there's a lot of Jews, but I was on the East Side when I was little, and there's no Jews there, and then once you go towards Pikesville, I went to this performing arts high school, and it was lots of Jews and just immediately gravitated towards them. What I
Mhm,
really liked was I came from a quiet household where you hide things, you don't talk about your feelings, family secrets, no hugs, really, not
waspy.
sort of, but I
mhm,
was like middle class. That's kind of an upper middle class cliche. My
mhm.
dad was very blue collar, doesn't give hugs still really. He doesn't smile in
Yeah,
pictures. And also they're baby boomers, which is very different from millennials who are very touchy-feely, all this
mhm.
stuff. Um, so yeah, I when I met Jewish people, they were, like, in a good way, loud and, like, they would say what they felt. There was
Mhm.
no, like, I'll just say BS.
Purpose.
It was just, like, very
Right.
straightforward, and I really liked that because all my life I was, like, the big feeler in my family, like, I I felt big feelings and I could never really express them, and so I also felt suffocated by that. And then my Jewish friends were just, like, into musical theater and very outgoing and, you know,
Mm.
that was
Mhm.
just so different. I loved being able to just, like, be myself with them and feel these things, and no one would judge me. That's what their life was like at home, that's what they grew up with, so I think that's really
Wow.
what drew me to them.
Uh-huh. So the 2 of you are starting to date, and what happens?
We were pretty broke, and I don't think we had even enough money for a slice of pizza. We'd usually go out for pizza
Mm.
for dinner, and I said, "Well, I know where we could get a free meal." And
Mhm.
um, but anyway, so I brought her to the Chabad. I think you should talk about what happened there.
Sure, when I met him, he was very nice. He had all these kids and his
The
wife
rabbi,
the yeah,
The rabbi, Rabbi Lane,
yeah,
yeah,
the wife
right.
was his wife was very nice to me as well. And it was just like the opposite of everything I grew up with. Like I said, my parents got divorced, so I'd eat alone in front of the TV. Even when we did get together for family gatherings on both sides, it was very quiet and still felt lonely. Here, everyone was, talking over each other. They were just like super happy to me, it seemed. The rabbi gave a speech, and I didn't really understand all the words he was saying, but it was a very moving speech. I had challah for the first time. I was like, they just come here and give you free food and they're so nice. And there's just people of all different kinds of backgrounds sitting with each other. No one's judging you. So it just felt like a big hug. And I felt this warmth inside of me that I'd never felt before. And that was like the moment that I started believing in God again. And
Mhm.
I had never experienced that feeling before. So every week I'd be like, can we go back there? And
and
it
then
wasn't
and I'd be like,
yeah.
"No, you don't want to go too much. You
Yeah.
you don't know if they can handle, you know." I'm like, and then she'd say, "Why not? They seem really nice." I'm like, "Yeah, they seem nice, but as soon as you start getting involved, that whole facade goes away." And I'm like, believe me, I grew up in this. I know how it is. They try to coax you in with fake niceness, and then they get really mean. Once they feel that you're stuck in the and they have control over you, then the claws come out. I said, even this rabbi, I don't fully trust that. He's like the
Mhm.
nicest one I found, but and I'll tell you something. One time I went there for a Purim party, and on Purim Jews drink, and the rabbi got drunk, and he said something to me that I took very offensively. It wasn't probably even that offensive, but I was very sensitive. Like I said, I was already coming from a place of like, my guard was up about religious Jews, so it probably wasn't even very bad, but I took it really bad. And I was like, well, there, that's done now too. And I had this moment which was a real turning point for me where I said to myself, like, I could just cut this off, like I have everything else, or I could be confrontational a little bit and ask him, like normally I would never do that. I've always been pretty non-confrontational and scared to sort of
Mhm.
speak up these things, and I'd rather just cut people off. And I had this moment where I changed and I said, no, I want to at least tell him, give him the let me hear him out, because before I
Mm,
completely cut him off, because he has been really nice up until this party, and then he says this mean thing. I want to hear what he has to say about it. And I went and I was terrified, and I asked him if I could meet with him, and I went up to the apartment and I told him, "This thing you said to me at the Purim thing was really hurtful." And he said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't even
Mhm.
remember what I said. I was drinking. It's a mitzvah to drink on Purim, and please forgive me, and I'm really sorry." And I was like, "Oh wow, he really is a nice guy." Like,
Mhm.
and I was about to cut him off and never go back again, and uh and I was like, "Wow, okay." And it was a maturity point for me because I'd never would have done that before. I would have just been emotional and angry.
Wow.
So that really
That's a
built
good
up a
point.
lot of trust between me and Rabbi Lane, and and um and made it somewhere that I felt comfortable continuing to go.
Wow, incredible. So at what point, Kylie, did thoughts of converting actually come to your mind?
yeah, so after Chabad, we went to his family's house for Friday night dinner. It was more of the same, people laughing, tons of food. I remember I didn't pace myself at all. It was his mom just kept bringing out food. I'm like, "This is so different from what I grew up with." One thing on the table maybe, and I just said to Danny at the end of it, "I'm so full," and he said, "Welcome to Judaism." And Um, but yeah, I really liked, you know, what I was learning about Shabbat. because I was a workaholic, I was really driven, and just having that time off, I was keeping it for Friday night. I would stop working, and that was really great. It gave me, space mentally to recharge. And then I
Mhm.
liked what I was learning about kashrut, about kosher, because I loved animals. We actually had a chicken and rooster at the time, and I just I love them, and I love learning about, like, how we slaughter them in Judaism.
What
I'd never even
why were you learning about Judaism at that point? Like, you had decided you wanna learn about it, you wanna convert, or
just
what was like, why were you learning about it?
I mean, just going to Chabad and then Friday night
Mm,
dinner at his family's house and then asking Danny questions, but, like, learning that they slaughtered animals in a way that was, not painful.
mm,
I learned that you had
mhm.
to feed your animals before yourself. We also had dogs, and that made a lot of sense, so it just seemed very compassionate. And then just learning about why bad things happen to good people and how we don't know God's plan, that was very reassuring, and just starting to believe in God, with the control thing, like, I didn't always have to be in control. For example, if I had woken up on the wrong side of the bed in the past, like in college, my whole day was ruined. And with Judaism, I learned that you can turn that around, you can completely control that, and you can be grateful. I had no gratitude before that, and then after I was like, "Well, if I'm waking up in a bad mood, at least I'm breathing, at least I'm alive, at least I have a roof over my head." And then you start listing all the things and you're like, "Oh, I'm actually, like, really have a good life." So, just that gratitude really transformed me, and so I wanted to keep going back to Chabad and his parents' house, and eventually told him, "I think I wanna convert." And he did not take it well at all.
Why not,
So
Daniel?
so he um so Kylie started she's a reader. So she would keep getting books delivered to the house, more and more books on Judaism. And I'd see if it was a movie, you'd see a little stack of books, and then it would cut to a bigger stack and a bigger stack and a bigger stack, and then she wouldn't see you behind the stack of books, because there's so many books. And that's what it would be like. I was touring. I would go out to the United Kingdom for a while and perform around the UK, doing shows for a month, and I'd come back to our apartment in Brooklyn, more books. And I went out to South
Mm.
Africa to do shows for a month, and I came back, more books. And every time I'd go away, I'd come back, it was looking like a Jewish library in my house. And what's going on? I'm going to convert to Judaism. I said, look, I don't want to be with a Jewish girl. That's one of the reasons I started dating you. I don't want to get sucked back into it. Chabad is nice. It's not all like that. Trust me. I'm like, I said, there's a lot of sinister stuff behind it, and control, and anyway, I had a lot of anger towards it. I said, and it's one of the reasons, the world it's split up over religion. I had all these things, like
It was John Lennon. You quoted John Lennon.
yeah, I was very
Imagine.
into John Lennon. Anyway, I was like, religion is a great divider of the world, and you know, I was very against the whole thing and didn't want to go back to it, and it had a lot of emotional baggage from my childhood tied up into it. And so she said, "Well,
How long did that last?
oh, long time.
Long time.
We had a lot of fights and nearly broke up over it a bunch of times, and she was very determined that
I
she
wouldn't
wanted to do
relent.
this, and I didn't really want to leave her.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, hopefully she'll just burn out on it, or she'll start to see things the way I do, and time. And I said, look, just don't convert Orthodox.
So he sent me
Mhm,
to 92nd Street Y, which actually had a class being taught by a modern Orthodox rabbi.
mhm.
And I said to him, after the class was over, all done, I really liked it. I want to continue my learning and I want to actually go into a conversion program. And he said, "Well, why?" I said, "Chabad doesn't do it." And he said, "So Google synagogue in your neighborhood and see what comes up." And I did. And I called, and the rabbi was very nice. And he said,
The Greenpoint Shul.
Yes, I did. And he actually said, "We have conversion classes going on here," which is very odd. Like, that
Mhm.
doesn't really happen. And he said, "Come on down." And after I hung up, Danny's like, "So what kind of synagogue is that?" I'm like, "Oh, I didn't ask." And I went and I discovered it was Orthodox. So then that led to another big fight.
Yeah, I was like, oh, now she's doing an Orthodox conversion. So she kept saying, you should come with me to the conversion classes. And I said, absolutely not. And it's just like waiting for her to like see it the way I see it one day, come home and be like, you were right. I'm like, let me just give it time. But she kept going and having good experiences, and she's becoming more, so to speak, religious, even though she's not Jewish. She starts keeping kosher. We had two kitchens, her kosher kitchen in my apartment and my non-kosher kitchen.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
like, um, and then some things happened. One is I finally decided, she kept pressuring me to go with her to this conversion class, and I decided to sabotage the entire thing and get us both kicked out so that I could have my old girlfriend back and set things back to normal. So I said, I'm going to go, and after the class, I'm going to talk to the rabbi, and I'm going to lay it all on him, and he's going to be so upset. He's going to kick us both out, and that's that. So I went, and with my devious plan, and afterwards, I really went off on this poor rabbi, Rabbi Maurice Applebaum, and I told him everything. I was angry about religion and Judaism and how it's all stupid and what happened in my life and how they were all horrible to me and everything. And I was waiting for him to be like, all right, get out of here. But he just sat there. He was like the kindest, sweetest, most patient person in the world. And at the
Mm,
end of it, he said, it's really upsetting what happened to you. He said, and if you decided you never wanted to come back here again, I personally would totally understand. And I totally get where you're at and why you feel the way you feel. And he totally validated me, which I didn't
mm,
expect. And he said, but listen, if you ever feel like you want to come back here again, these doors are always open to you. And we'll
mm,
always be happy to have you here. And maybe you could take a look at Judaism again and see what we do here. And we'd love to have you. But if you don't ever want to come back again, I
mm.
understand. And I thought he was gonna be like, your girlfriend can't be part of this program anymore if that's how you feel.
Right.
So you're out.
Right. Wow.
But he said, "No. If you wanna feel that way, you could feel that way. And if she wants to feel this way, she could feel this way." And
Right.
I was like, "Wow, I did not see that coming." That,
Hmm.
was really shocking to me. And I said, "You know what?" To Kylie, I'll go and check out that class with you again."
Hmm.
So I started
Wow.
going, and I started to see Judaism. I feel like I converted to Judaism with her because I saw it with completely fresh new eyes. First of all, everything I thought I remembered about Judaism from learning as a kid, I didn't remember.
Mm,
And um, I was just like amazed to learn about this religion that seems so beautiful, and being around people who are converting to Judaism and were excited about it. It was a very different thing than could have ever imagined, and it was infectious, and I became excited about it too, and I started to see it as really beautiful and special that I was part of this. And the second thing that happened is I went to Whole Foods in Columbus Circle when, as I often would, for lunch, and I got chicken at the buffet there, which obviously wasn't kosher, and I'm sitting having it, and I felt, and this is like the one kind of like open miracle I would say in my story, is that I felt some kind of thing that I've never felt before, and I never felt it since, but I can only describe it as like a spiritual illness. I felt like a shiver
mm,
went through my soul, and all of a sudden I felt like, Kylie was always talking about the pain that the animals are suffering and why she became kosher, and I felt like this chicken was tormented when it was killed, and it seems totally insane to talk about it out loud. I know that, but I felt like the pain of this animal, and it lasted with me for 3 days. And
mm,
I remember staying in bed for an entire day. I was like shivering, but I wasn't sick, and I was just like totally like had this moment where I was like, either this means something. Whatever I'm going through right now is spiritual and it means something, and either I can ignore it and I will never have a chance at actually embracing my spirituality ever again, or I have to listen to it.
mm.
And I fought myself for 3 days on it. At the end of 3 days, I decided that I'm going to keep kosher with chicken.
And so you
Wow.
went to Satmar Williamsburg and with the signs in Yiddish
This
and
is how much I
there's
fought everything, by the way. I was like,
Wow.
doesn't apply to
Wow.
beef, and I questionable if it applies to turkey, but God definitely wants me to keep kosher when
Oh,
it
sure.
comes to chicken. So that was that
Wow.
was the first major step of me, um, actually embracing things again.
Embracing Judaism.
so I switched to
Mhm.
this rabbi in LA and we met a very amazing rabbi, Rabbi Elhanan Shaf. He helped me with it. He was my sponsoring rabbi and started learning with his sister. And it
Sarah
was
Schaff.
no, with his sister, Sarah Littman.
Sarah
She's a
Littman,
teacher with
sorry.
OU, and I just loved everything I was learning about it. But at the same time, I was taking it very slow because
Mhm.
I there was a lot at once, and they don't tell you everything at once. And if they did, some people would probably be like, "Well, I'm not going to do all that."
Mhm.
You learn it slowly and you take it on slowly. Like I was doing Shabbat was always hard for me because I was, as I said, a workaholic. I was always on my phone. So I could do Friday night, but then by the time Saturday came, I was like, I have to check my phone. But then I had a moment where, I was looking at an article I'd written and there were all these like mean comments on it. And I was looking on Shabbat and getting super upset. And Danny's like, why are you letting this ruin your Shabbat? Just turn your phone off. And I did
Mhm.
from that moment on. So yeah, I went and I took conversion classes and I ended up converting from that time within 2 years. And
Wow.
before I converted, I said to Danny, I want to go see Israel because I'd heard so much about it.
So Rabbi Brander from Link talks. Rabbi Schaff and Rabbi Brander were talking, and he told him what happened with my getting kicked out of um, yeshiva in ninth grade, and I had all this anger that I'd still had with me. And Rabbi Brander said to me, "It's not good to walk around with anger." And I think this
Mhm.
was a major point in the whole story. And he said, "You have to forgive them for that." And the rabbi had tried many times to reach out and apologize to me, who was the head of the school that kicked me out, but I didn't wanna
Mhm.
hear from him. He
Mhm.
came to LA for something else, and Rabbi Brander arranged for us to meet, and he apologized to me, and he said, "It was wrong that we kicked you out in ninth grade, and we never should have done that." And I was a young Rosh Kollel at the time, a young principal, and I succumbed to the pressure of the board, and I knew it was wrong at the time, and I shouldn't have done it, and I hope you'll forgive me. And I forgave him, and for me, that was a major change in my transformation. Like, Rabbi
Mhm.
Brander was 100% right. As soon as that happened, and I was able to let go of anger and resentment, and boy, that opened up the world for me in a different way, Judaism-wise. Now you could go back to what you were saying about us going to Israel through Rabbi Brander.
Yeah, so he sent us to Israel. He found a program that took us in. I was going to seminary. Danny was going to Kollel. And it was when I got there, it was a total culture shock, but granny's cutting me in line at the supermarket and not knowing any Hebrew and my hair dryer exploding on me. But um I when I went to the shook especially, I felt really like, "Oh, wow, my soul is coming alive." And then Danny came like a week later and he proposed to me at the Kotel, the Western Wall, when it was snowing, and it was just spectacular because a few days I'd been there before and it was really crowded at the Kotel and I didn't feel any connection to God there. And I called him in a panic. I'm like, am I really a Jew? Because I'm going through this process. I'm almost done. And I go to the wall and I don't feel anything. I just feel anxious. And he's like, oh no, I don't know. Like, that's really bad. And then when it was snowing and I was literally the only woman there because Jerusalem, when it snows a tiny bit, they don't know what to do. and
Right.
and I was just standing there alone with my thoughts and it was so beautiful and I felt it and I was like, "Okay, good. This is what I'm meant to be doing." And so we got
Wow.
proposed there, came back, got married, and we have been living a frum, Orthodox life ever since. But
I felt like my soul was ignited there too, because I went to this yeshiva, they set me up with Chappelle's, and I felt like I got to pick up where I'd left off in ninth grade,
Mhm.
and I felt like I finally got to feel like I completed something, and it brought me back to where I once was, and it was this amazing experience in that yeshiva in Israel, and I highly recommend if anyone's listening to this and they have the opportunity to go and learn in Chappelle's in Jerusalem, there are places like that sent me for free that will help you to go and do that, and it was so transformative for me and unbelievable, and it made me feel whole again. It was amazing.
Mhm. Wow. Incredible story. So, looking back at your whole journey now, what message do you want people to take from both of you? What would you like people to know from your story?
What message I would say is, first of all, don't become married to where you are, um, mentally, ideologically. You should always realize that, first of all, question yourself. Always think that maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe my perception is skewed. Maybe my emotions are blocking my perception of reality right now, or I'm seeing things through a tunnel or whatever, um, don't write people off. Be open to
Mm,
forgiveness. Um, be open to change. It's
mm,
okay to doubt yourself. It's okay to reevaluate things. Don't carry anger in your heart. Don't carry resentments. And that when you embrace your spirituality, it can transform your emotionality.
mm,
One thing I'll say one more thing that I thought was very paramount to me when I was learning about Judaism the second time, when I went through my quote unquote conversion, is that I thought there are days that are sad and there are days that are happy on the Jewish calendar, and you're commanded to be happy and you're commanded to be sad. And I thought that was really like, what are you supposed to have to be happy if you're not happy? And what I learned
mm.
is that it's God's way of teaching us to regulate our emotions, to say that you are bigger than your emotions. Yes, you can be happy if you are commanded to be happy. You can be sad if you are commanded to be sad. And in doing so, you take control of your emotions, and it's empowering to you in your life. And I
That's a
think
great lesson.
that lesson is sort of my story in a way, because if you allow your emotions to control you, you're not in the driver's seat of your life. So that is huge takeaway that I hope people can get from this. And Kylie,
100%. Beautiful.
over to you.
I'd say it's always important to live your life with gratitude, even if you're in the lowest place of your life. Everything bad has happened to you. Just wake up, say Moda'ani, the prayer we say when we wake up, the prayer of thanks to Hashem. And that you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to live in the gray and to just trust that Hashem is here for you. We're in a post October 7th world that was really hard on all of us. We all knew about the Holocaust and the Inquisition and all the pogroms and things that happened to Jews in the past, but we actually experienced it in real time. And a lot of people say, well, this is proof that God doesn't exist, but we really don't know. We don't see gravity, but we know that gravity exists. And when we say that everything is for the best, it's not being, I think the word is Pollyanna-ish. Like it's not writing anything off that's bad. It's just saying we don't actually know what the definition of the best is. We don't know necessarily what is good and what is bad. And when we go up, when we live to 120 plus, we're gonna see what the plan was the whole time. And I truly believe it is for the good. And you have to just have that in you. Even if you're angry with God, it's better to be angry with God than to just disconnect yourself from God. It's better to have that emotion because it means you still believe. Don't disconnect yourself from God. And again, if you're in that low place, be grateful, do a good deed, go out and give charity, just do something. You can uplift yourself like Danny said. You don't have to live in these emotions. You can make yourself feel better.
And I'll add
Beautiful.
one more thing
Mhm.
from my rabbi, Rabbi Asher Abitan of blessed memory, that was my greatest inspiration, and I credit him for keeping me in Judaism at all throughout the years. Um, who taught me that you should always greet people with a smile, always wear a
Mm,
smile. And he was always
mm,
smiling. And if you put a smile out there to the world, you'll experience life completely differently
hmm.
in what you.
Beautiful. Really beautiful. Last question, how would you complete this sentence? What inspires me the most today is
Do you want to?
More than what we just said, what inspires me the most today.
about Judaism, about
Oh,
God
I have
is
an answer. I'd say again back to post October 7th world, just seeing how the Jewish community has come together. We really are one big family. We really care not only about ourselves but about the world. If you see the building that Israel does around the world, when there's an earthquake, we're there. Like we just have the biggest hearts. And
100%.
and we love each other, and I just love to see, we talk at Chabad's. Danny does a lot of comedy, and then I'll do the inspiration part. And I just love seeing people who are like in their 70s and they say, I've never been religious, but these days the world is so crazy and I've been coming for Shabbat and I love it at this Chabad. And that's just amazing to me. I love seeing these people just feeling inspired. And, you know, they may not have lived in a Jewish neighborhood before, come to any Jewish events or synagogue in a long time, but they're coming and they're feeling like they're part of a family. Wherever you are, there's someone that cares about you. And, that's what I learned from the Rebbe. I always think about him, like if I get mad at a fellow Jew because, they're a different political affiliation or they say something I disagree with, I just think, what would the Rebbe do? And the Rebbe would just stand there and be gracious and understanding. And he would not judge them and he would just welcome them with open arms. So I think that, we need to be more like him, more like the Rebbe, more like God sees us. God sees us as his children, and we need to love each other. And we're all part of one big family. And that's how we're going to be redeemed and win in Israel. That's how our Mashiach will come. Our temple will be rebuilt. Just always have fellow love for your fellow Jew, and be part of this community.
I think
Beautiful. Thank you.
that is
Yes.
beautiful. I think what inspires me the most these days is probably my children. Like when they come back from Gone and they're excited to tell me that they learned something, or when we do Moda'ani in the morning.
How many children do you have?
Thank God we have 2 girls right now.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
we do Moda'ani in the
Wow.
morning, and it's like sharing with them. And like my daughter is so my 4-year-old daughter is so spiritual and so pure, thank God. And like I was scrolling through my phone and there was a comic drawing of somebody at the beach. And she's like, "That's not Sneas, Daddy. Don't look
It's
at
not
it."
modest.
It's a cartoon.
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
just like so impressed with her. I just like she's so
Children are incredible. Yeah.
incredible and inspirational. Both of them are to me.
Yeah.
And just to what Kylie was saying, one quick point. I went to Trader Joe's last night and I saw a guy, not religious guy, head shaved, no yarmulke, whatever, but he was wearing a chai necklace. And I was like, "Hello, my Jewish brother." And he's like, "Oh," and he quickly put his necklace away. Like, I never wear it out. I never wear it out. I said, "You should wear it out. We gotta be proud. We're strong. We're a family." And he's like, "You're right." And he took it back out and I was like, "Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai," and he's like, "Am Yisrael Chai." And
Beautiful.
and I just think like we're in this moment right now where we have such potential to connect with other Jews. Talking to what Kylie said about us living in this post October 7th world right now, there is a bit of a awakening about Judaism for, when we have protests going on and people are reminding all Jews of all levels of observance that they are Jewish. It reminds us all that we are one Jewish family. And we have
100%.
this great opportunity to reach out to each other now and maybe tell other people to go check out a Chabad like I did it in North Brooklyn and see where it brings them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us and for your inspirational story. That really may you, see a lot of kindness and goodness and inspiration, continued nachas, pleasure from your children
Man,
in all the future. Thank you again for joining us.
thank you for
so
having
much.
us.
What a fascinating journey that the Lobels had. Throughout it, you just feel like something was pushing them, something was pulling them, whether it was Daniel's inability to give up on his Judaism, represented in his anger at Judaism, or this Kylie's desire to just find something deeper, find something that was more meaningful for her, that she understood was, and that she almost intuitively felt as soon as she met Judaism, and as soon as she began to explore what Judaism was. This kind of pull for both of them comes out so strongly in both of their stories. Obviously, the lessons and the messages that they gave us are also so important. How important it is to be kind to somebody. How you never really know what your kindness, what your smile can really do to somebody, and that ability to just be open to explore new things and to find a new path for you to forge forward. If you enjoy watching these videos, please make sure that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. Look for us on all podcast platforms on Apple, Spotify. We're there. Please like us. Please send us a message. Tell us, what did you like? What inspired you about Kylie and Daniel's story? What part did you relate to? What part of their journey really spoke to you? Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being part of the Extraordinary community.